The numbers are sobering. Median rents jumped by a whopping $225 last year, part of a 27% nationwide increase over the last 3 years. With vacancy rates at near record lows, tenants have to take what they can get, no matter how mouldy.
You could probably feed a family of 4 with the mould on the roof.
The alternative? Join more than 1,600 Aussies forced into homelessness every month.
In a country as wealthy as ours, everybody should have a secure home. We are in a housing crisis.
So how do we keep a lid on rising rents? Well, the Greens want a 2-year rent freeze with subsequent increases capped at 2% every 2 years. That's a condition of their support for Labor's $10 billion housing policy, or HAF for short.
Damn right.
But Albo would rather risk a new election than have the states impose a rental cap.
We won't be nationalising private housing in this country. We won't be doing things that make it more difficult rather than less difficult.
Some experts also believe the Greens' idea could backfire badly.
Strict caps on the growth in rents or an outright rent freeze risks being counterproductive, basically because it'll mean less housing available in the long run.
Grattan's head housing guy reckons an expanded rent assistance program can offer the same relief without the knock-on effects.
That's a payment that goes to low-income renters. The government has increased it by 15% so far in the May budget. That increase should be at least 40%.
But the biggest problem is we need more housing. An Airbnb tax could help, hitting short-stay properties with higher land taxes to lure landlords back into the rental market, or a vacancy tax on empty investment properties and holiday homes. That one is a bit controversial, but since British Columbia did it back in 2018, an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 properties have been added to the rental market.
Look, a vacant property tax sounds like a good idea. You bring extra supply onto the market. The issue is there tends to be carve-outs for those with holiday homes, those with a pad in the city that they use for work. It doesn't actually change people's decisions very much and doesn't add to much extra housing stock.
Now, I don't have a clever segue here, so let's just jump into the other side of this cursed coin, the housing market. The proportion of homes owned outright is at a 30-year low, and borrowers are badly stretched, with first home buyers expected to spend up to 58% of their income on mortgage repayments by the end of the year.
Both Anya and I have not switched on the heating system. That's one of the sacrifices we are making. We have even taken a switching off the hot water after we are done with our showers.
And believe it or not, they're the lucky ones. House prices are expected to surge again next year as interest rates stabilise. So if you're priced out now, you may never get in.
So anyone sitting on the sidelines thinking, look, I'll just wait for the market to crash, thinking this fiscal cliff is coming, I think that's a myth.
The underlying problem is a simple one. Too many people, not enough houses. Labor's commitment to build 30,000 social housing properties falls well short of the 250,000 new homes we're expected to need by 2028. To make up that shortfall, experts are calling for a radical reshaping of our cities. NIMBYs be damned.
We need to see more densification in our cities. Things like terraced homes, it's townhouses, it's low-rise apartment blocks of 3 to 4 stories.
Fixing the planning system is the number one thing that Commonwealth and state governments could do to improve housing affordability.
I believe the solution is reducing the amount of stamp duty, which hopefully should bring more sellers to market. If we can increase the supply of property coming to market, that should put less pressure on prices.
The residential property market is a $9.8 trillion magic pudding, and just about everyone's gotten a slice, from owner-occupiers and private landlords all the way up to private equity firms. Even the young working Aussies currently being screwed by the rental crisis, their banks and super funds have bet big on property as well. Deflate a bubble that big and you're taking a lot of money out of a lot of people's pockets. Burst a bubble that big and everyone suffers. Hey, if it were easy, someone would have done it by now.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ah, bloody New Zealand. 2 years ago, the Kiwis were confronted by a housing and rental affordability crisis arguably worse than ours. So they responded with major planning reforms, allowing developments of up to 3 dwellings and 3 stories on any existing residential property in their 5 biggest cities.
We've seen the housing stock there grow dramatically since those reforms came through. Some estimates suggest that they could have reduced rents, for the typical dwelling by something between 10 and 20% already.
Aussies are sick of the stalemate. We can no longer afford not to fix housing, and while there are no easy solutions, there are plenty of hard ones. But do our leaders have the courage to deliver them? Well, our leaders met at National Cabinet today. It will shock you to know that they met before watching that package, which I think was negligent of them. But nonetheless, they did meet and they've made some announcements. They've announced that they're aiming to boost Australia's housing supply. The building target of 1 million new homes that previously existed has increased to 1.2 million over 5 years. $3 billion in federal funding will help the states and territories make it happen.
There's an incentive there that states and territories are aware of, and a reward for delivering on the increased supply that Australia needs.
Renters weren't left out. Also, there'll be a move towards national consistency on banning no-cause evictions and limiting rent increases to once a year. Julie Collins is the National Housing Minister and is with us now. Minister, so as I said there, you're planning to build 1.2 million new homes over 5 years. It's an increase of 200,000 above previous plans. But immigration is meant to be at record levels too. We're on track to see 300,000 people this year alone. So will this be enough?
Look, what we have from experts is that we need to do more than the 1 million homes. This is about us doing more. It's about working with the states and territories, working with the construction sector about what's possible in terms of adding to supply. What we're talking about today is some of the most significant planning reforms that will occur in Australia, all states and territories. You're talking about here premiers and chief ministers, 8 different jurisdictions, all agreeing to do planning reforms to get more homes on the ground.
But do the numbers add up, I suppose, is what I'm asking. The increase that you're proposing here doesn't seem to match the increase just from immigration alone.
Look, this is what we're told will actually increase the numbers of homes. We know that the answer here is supply. We know that our 1 million homes was ambitious but achievable. So asking the states and territories to overshoot that by another 200,000 is very significant indeed.
So New Zealand is encouraging medium density development across their major cities. This proposal seems to involve something similar. How much approval power will it involve taking away from the councils?
Well, we want to make sure that we have improved community consultation, but also that we have better timeframes for getting what are reasonable developments up and medium density and higher density where it's appropriate. This is about making sure that zoning changes occur, planning changes occur, and that we get more uplift in particularly well-located areas around things like public transport, schools, healthcare, and where people actually want to live and work.
Minister, have the states committed to this? You mentioned, transport, schools, healthcare. There's a lot of work to be done. It's not just building 1.2 million houses.
That's right, and that's why we're talking here about some significant incentive payments from the Commonwealth. We're talking here about $3 billion at the end of the 5 years for states and territories that overshoot their target. We're talking about having $500 million on the table early to allow local governments and state governments to deal with some of the infrastructure constraints. For instance, if you want to do medium density in the middle of an inner city, sometimes you've got to increase the size of the water pipes or the sewage pipes. We're talking about, making sure that we have better precinct planning and that we have that community infrastructure.
So can you, hand on heart, say to the people who are living in these areas that they're not going to be overrun by traffic, that there will be enough schools for people who are already there?
What we can say is that we're working with states and territories to make significant improvements. We've been pretty clear also that this isn't going to happen overnight. We can't click our fingers and fix everything straight away. But what we can do is move as quickly as we can and all head in the same direction.
Now, renters' rights have been a big sticking point. Personally, I was a renter for 17 years, and some of the places you're in, the owners are terrible, the places aren't great. The rental standards aren't as strong as they are in some other parts of the world, and you've agreed to harmonise those rental standards, but how do you enforce them?
What we obviously want is states and territories to use the levers that they have available to them. We're talking about 9 different reforms to improve renters' rights. We're talking about things like minimum standards, making sure, for instance, that everybody has things like hot and cold running water, a working stove. Wow. But also, importantly, making sure that we have things like reasonable grounds for evictions so that tenants can, get things maintained, get things improved without any risk of eviction.
How in a country like Australia in 2023 can hot and cold water still be a thing that's up for debate?
Well, clearly the states and territories say that it shouldn't be, and we agree with them, and we're going to make sure that we have minimum standards for rentals.
Meanwhile, we have a lot of vacant dwellings in Australia. We've got a lot of short-term rentals, so these are people putting their properties on things like Airbnb. That seems like a lot of housing stock that could be ready to go now if you applied the appropriate policies to them. Does the government have any plan to address that?
Oh, well, one of the 9 things we're talking about in terms of the renters' rights is states and territories agreeing to look at short stay accommodation and what can be done. We know that the data and the evidence is showing that in some markets it's having a very significant impact, with what were properties that were previously available for long-term leases now being for short-term accommodation. So it's about what levers do state governments and indeed local governments have available to them and what actually works. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence around what actually works with those interventions, but this is about states and territories agreeing to do more work to deal with this situation because it clearly is having an impact.
And would you consider something like a vacancy tax?
Well, federally, we already have one. That would be states and territories to look at that. The information and the data that they have available to them about what these properties are and where they are is one of the challenges. So we need to get better data and evidence as well. We do know that some local governments and some state governments have already moved. So it's also about getting people like our Interim Supply and Affordability Council to look at that data and evidence about does this change behaviour, is this improving things?
All right, so more to keep an eye on. I've got a feeling this story is not going anywhere in a hurry. We appreciate your time, Minister. Thank you.
Thanks very much.